The forum boarium was permeated by the smell of moisture and cow excrement. 3 pairs of men, equipped with armor, entered a hastily constructed fighting area under the sky. They were not military personnel. They were enslaved individuals trained for mortal combat. Their fight was not for prestige but intended to honor a deceased person. This took place in 264 BC. Desimus Junius Brutus Scaver had recently buried his father. To observe this event, he organized what the Roman historian Livy subsequently described as the initial recorded instance of gladiatorial fighting in Rome. At this time, it was not yet a public entertainment. It functioned as a funerary obligation, known by Romans as a munus, a duty owed to the departed. The participants shed blood not for sport, but as a serious offering. Nevertheless, this personal ceremony, derived from the Campanian tradition of human sacrifice at grave sites, quickly adopted an alternative form. These deadly rites had already started transforming in southern Italy, particularly in settlements like Capua. The Samnites, previous adversaries of Rome, had long featured duels between warriors during feasts dedicated to the dead. Over time, the custom of ritual killing evolved into ritualized combat. The actual death became secondary to the act of fighting. It was, as the Christian commentator Tertullian noted later, the sacrifice of blood for the purpose and fulfillment of the dead, yet it increasingly provided diversion for those who were alive. By the conclusion of the 3rd century BC, these duels were transitioning from funeral services to public celebrations. No longer limited to mourning ceremonies, they began appearing in Rome's expanding catalogue of ludi, games authorized by the Senate. Originally religious in character, the ludi Romani were held to venerate Jupiter, frequently during periods of national emergency. The Senate, either fearful of divine anger or seeking heavenly favor, would vote funds for them, making the games an official state affair, not a matter of private sorrow. This shift from a family custom to a civic performance was subtle, but irreversible. The Senate's participation expanded. Magistrates, specifically aediles, utilized these displays to acquire popular support. Blood thus transformed into politics. Death became a public display. Toward the close of the Republic, provisional wooden arenas were replaced by permanent stone amphitheaters. What commenced as a solemn obligation in a muddy marketplace was integrated into the Roman state structure, formalized, put on a calendar, and financed publicly. Consequently, with every drop of crimson spilled onto the sand, the state was essentially composing a new kind of regulation, one not carved on tablets but established in masonry. Gladiators were compelled to engage in combat with starving animals. The metal barrier grated open and silence descended upon the onlookers. A solitary figure emerged from the depths of the arena tunnel. He was unshoed, partially unclothed, carrying only a small dagger. Across the dirt, the enclosure door ascended. A lion, its bony structure pushing against its tangled hair, stepped into the daylight. It was famished, vigilant, and coiled up due to hunger. This situation was not a formal fight. It represented an execution organized for the enjoyment of the masses. By the 1st century CE, the Roman fighting venues had become stages not just for human conflict, but also for mandatory human confrontation with predatory wildlife, termed venationes, when presented as simulated hunts, or damnatio ad bestias, when utilized for capital punishment. These spectacles were devised to merge the distinction between retribution and amusement. Convicted offenders, captured adversaries, and occasionally rebellious bondsmen were thrust into the ring against lions, panthers, or bears, frequently weakened by starvation to guarantee a swift and brutal conclusion. This custom had earlier origins. By the end of the Republic, military leaders such as Pompey had grasped the political influence inherent in the spectacle. He famously arranged exhibitions in which people were matched against animals in elaborate presentations, events where bloodshed provided both penalty and popular approval. The more sensational the fatality, the greater the celebration of state dominance. However, not everyone who encountered the beasts was a condemned criminal. Some individuals were specialized fighters, bestiarii, coerced or compensated to engage wild beasts for the spectator's pleasure. Elaborate floor art and carved stone reliefs from the early empire vividly portray such scenarios. A warrior with a raised spear faces a pouncing lion. A net thrower evades the razor-sharp claws of a leopard. One sculptural panel from the 1st century CE depicts a fighter looking directly at a charging animal, captured mid-movement in sculpted dread. These instances were factual, not imaginary. In Roman Britain, archaeological digs uncovered a human pelvis, likely belonging to a gladiator, marked by deep bite evidence consistent with the jaws of a large feline predator. The injuries narrated their own silent account. He had perished locked in battle against a lion. Across the expansive empire, spanning from the Colosseum to regional amphitheaters, this bloody ritual unfolded recurrently. Seneca, writing during the 1st century CE, documented how some detainees chose to end their own lives prior to their scheduled display rather than enduring a death designed for the entertainment of others. Their act of refusal constituted a silent protest, a definitive assertion of autonomy within a system designed to strip them of all control. What transpired within the arena was not merely aggression, it was calculated degradation. Famine was honed into an instrument. Animals were deliberately starved not solely to guarantee death, but to heighten anticipation, ensuring the audience remained breathless. As humanity encountered claw, tooth, and destiny in Rome, legality and performance advanced in unison, and the fierce cry of a lion was not just the sound of nature unrestrained. It represented the voice of authority, intentionally maintained and deprived to serve the government. Naumachii, Rome's deadly water shows. The water shimmered under the Roman sunlight, tranquil for a brief instant. Then drums pounded, military horns pierced the atmosphere, and two complete fleets rapidly approached each other across a basin made by human hands. Soldiers stood on the decks armed with spears and siege weapons. Below them, thousands cheered, not from riverbanks but from terraced stone seating. This was not actual warfare, it was spectacle. The Romans referred to them as naumachii. These were simulated sea engagements fought not far out at sea, but within purpose-built reservoirs, frequently excavated by imperial decree. Julius Caesar organized the inaugural one in 46 BC. Close to the Tiber River, he mandated the digging of an artificial body of water to reenact a conflict between Tyrian and Egyptian naval forces. Authentic vessels, genuine weaponry, and real individuals, convicted offenders, fought not as performers but as combatants with zero expectation of survival. The magnitude of the spectacle increased. Augustus, Caesar's successor, constructed a massive reservoir in 2 BC, measuring 1,800 by 1,200 Roman feet. It was so expansive that it necessitated its own water delivery system, the aqua alciatina, for filling. On those waters, 30 warships collided, each crewed by sentenced felons, reaching into the thousands. The scope was astounding. The implied message was unambiguous. Rome possessed the ability to command not only military forces but the very forces of nature. Occasionally, the water displays extended beyond man-made lakes. In AD 52, Emperor Claudius drained Lake Fucine, a mountain lake, and marked the occasion with a naumachia. The fighters acknowledged him with words preserved in history. Morituri salutant, meaning, "Those who are about to perish salute you." Whether this phrase was pre-written or spontaneous, it encapsulated the stark fatalism of men designated to die for public pleasure. By the time the Colosseum was inaugurated under Emperor Titus, naumachii had become synonymous with imperial magnificence. Some scholars suggest he might have utilized Augustus's nearby basin for naval battles during the amphitheater's dedication ceremonies. Subsequently, during Domitian's reign, comparable games were potentially staged inside the Colosseum itself. Its floor was temporarily flooded to host small-scale maritime devastation. Even under Trajan, a century after Caesar, the practice persisted. He oversaw the construction of the Naumachia Vaticanana in AD 109. This was a massive, water-filled arena situated close to the Vatican Hill, where additional spectacles of fighting and demise transpired before enthusiastic throngs. Every Naumachia transcended mere demonstration. It served as an exhibition of absolute command over water, over human life, and over the empire. In these planned battles, Rome did more than merely reenact military victories. It recreated dominance as a structured ritual, deriving strength from the perception that armed conflict could be manufactured and still maintain its total effectiveness. By the date of the Colosseum's grand opening in AD 80, executions were no longer just punitive acts. They were highly dramatized. Emperors, starting with Titus, utilized the midday intermission between gladiatorial contests to present mythical acts of torture. These were not symbolic performances. They were actual fatalities intended to mimic the suffering of legendary characters. Martial, the poet and an observer of those inaugural spectacles, documented what he witnessed. He depicted a person representing Orpheus entering the arena to charm savage animals through song. Yet, contrary to the legend, where nature yields to Orpheus's music, the animals in the arena were unaffected. A bear promptly mutilated the performer. In another instance, a man portraying Daedalus, the mythological inventor who used wings made of wax, was violently torn apart by a different creature. Martial, employing sharp sarcasm, wrote that this man must now yearn for his feathers. One particularly unsettling recreation involved the tale of Pasiphae, the Cretan queen who was condemned to harbor unnatural desire for a bull. Roman onlookers observed a female, or possibly a sentenced male in disguise, being subjected to a beast in a twisted imitation of her prescribed destiny. The show obliterated the barriers between ancient mythology, formal punishment, and prurient observation. Fire also played a significant part. The tunica molesta, a garment saturated with tar, was attached to the condemned person and ignited. Sometimes this event was framed as the death of Mutius Scaevola, the Roman hero who demonstrated his allegiance by holding his hand in a flame. Regardless of whether the victim represented Scaevola or another burning martyr, the conclusion was identical. Screams were silenced beneath the sound of applause. Tertullian, writing as a Christian under Roman authority, fiercely described how victims were incinerated alive, bound to pillars, and ridiculed as actors in a drama of agony. "We are mocked as kindling men," he wrote, detailing executions where individuals were transformed into living torches, with suffering disguised as a moral public display. These mythological inflictions were not focused on narration. They represented domination masked by ritual. Rome did not simply kill. It ensured death echoed divine retribution, offering the spectators not actual fairness, but a warped type of emotional release. Thus, as ancient stories were revived through blood and intense heat, the line separating performance and execution dissolved. In the Roman fighting venue, myths were not merely recited, they were lived again. Rome's arenas converted religious custom into state policy, transforming spectacle into governance. Blood spilled on the dirt, water, and fire created a society that assessed power based on the controlled staging of death. Their reverberations still influence every discussion concerning violence and public entertainment. Which display, funeral duels, animal hunts, naumachiae, or legendary tortures, best demonstrates Rome's supremacy over life itself? Offer your perspective below. As Seneca documented in his correspondence to Lucilius, "I return home more covetous, more competitive, more self-indulgent, indeed, even more savage and inhuman because I have spent time among human beings."